I'm Morgan. 3 months ago, I was forced to sleep on a cot in my parents' garage while distant relatives I barely knew got my childhood bedroom. I overheard my mother call me just the family disappointment when my aunt asked where I was staying. The next morning, I slid the property deed across the breakfast table and watched their faces change when they realized I wasn't just their daughter. I was their landlord. But that moment was just the culmination of years of being undervalued and dismissed. Let me take you back to how it all started. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. It was supposed to be a quick visit. Drop by my parents' house to pick up some mail they'd been collecting while I was traveling for work. As a commercial property assessor, I spend weeks on the road evaluating buildings for investment firms. Not glamorous, but it pays well, and I'm good at spotting value where others don't. The August heat was stifling as I pulled into the familiar driveway of the colonial-style house where I grew up in Lakeside, Connecticut. Cars lined both sides of the street, unusual for a Wednesday afternoon. I noticed out-of-state plates: Florida, Texas, Ohio. That's when I remembered. The Patterson family reunion was this week. My mother had mentioned it months ago, but I'd been focused on a major project in Denver, and it had completely slipped my mind. The reunion only happened every 5 years, bringing together relatives from across the country, many of whom I barely remembered from childhood. I considered driving away and coming back another day, but I needed those documents for a closing tomorrow. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of my car and headed toward the wraparound porch where voices and laughter spilled through open windows. My mother answered the door, her surprised expression quickly turning to one I recognized all too well: disappointment, tinged with irritation. "Morgan, what are you doing here?" She blocked the entrance, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "I told you I'd pick up my mail today," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. "The Westbrook contracts? I need them for tomorrow's meeting." "Oh, right," she sighed. "Well, you've picked quite a time to show up. Everyone's here for the reunion." Before I could respond, my father appeared behind her, drink in hand, his face flushed from what I assumed was a combination of summer heat and bourbon. "Morgan, come in," he gestured expansively, always the performative host. "Everyone, look who's here. Our wandering daughter has returned." Heads turned, faces I vaguely recognized offering polite smiles. My cousin Amber, who'd always made it clear she thought my career choices were beneath her, raised an eyebrow and whispered something to her husband. My Aunt Patricia rushed over with exaggerated enthusiasm, examining me like I was a specimen. "Morgan. My goodness, how long has it been? Still not married? No children yet? What are you now, 34? 32, I corrected automatically, though it didn't matter. In Patterson family currency, a woman my age without a husband or children was considered to be in serious deficit. "Morgan's always been career-focused," my mother interjected, her tone making it sound like a terminal illness rather than a choice. "She evaluates buildings or something." "Commercial property assessment," I clarified for the 1,000th time. "I was just stopping by to pick up some mail." "Well, now that you're here, you must stay for dinner," my father announced. Several relatives nodded in agreement, though no one seemed particularly enthusiastic. I tried to decline, explaining my early meeting tomorrow, but my father was insistent. "Family comes first, Morgan. You can spare one evening." Those words, "family comes first," had been weaponized against me throughout my life, usually when I was expected to sacrifice something important while no one else seemed bound by the why, same obligation. Reluctantly, I agreed to stay just for dinner. That's when my mother pulled me aside, her voice lowered. "You'll need to stay the night too. The roads will be too dark to drive back to the city." Before I could protest, she continued, "We've got the house full with relatives. You can sleep in the garage. We've set up a cot out there for overflow. It's just for one night. The garage, not the living room sofa, not sharing with a cousin, but the detached garage where my father kept his lawn equipment and old car parts. I wanted to argue but knew it would only create a scene, something my mother abhorred unless she was the one orchestrating it. "Fine," I said tightly. "I'll get my overnight bag from the car." As I turned to leave, I overheard my aunt asking where I would be sleeping. "Morgan? Oh, she's just in the garage," my mother replied dismissively. "It's fine. She's always been the family disappointment anyway, not like she's not used to it." I froze, the words hitting me like a physical blow. The family disappointment. Said so casually, as if it were a known fact, my official designation in the Patterson hierarchy. In that moment, standing on the porch of the house where I grew up, something crystallized inside me, a realization that had been forming for years. I wasn't actually surprised by my mother's words. What surprised me was that I'd spent so long trying to earn approval that was never going to come. What my family didn't know, what I hadn't told them, was that 3 months ago, I'd made a significant investment. After years of evaluating properties, for others, I'd finally made a move of my own. When Lakeside Heritage Properties had quietly listed several historic homes for sale to avoid market speculation, I'd been one of the first to know, including this house, my parents' house. The house they'd been renting for the past 15 years after financial troubles forced them to sell their previous home. I returned to my car, grabbed my overnight bag, and pulled out a folder containing a copy of the property deed. Tomorrow morning, the family disappointment would have something to say at breakfast. Dinner was exactly what I expected, a performance of family unity that felt hollow beneath the surface. Aunt Patricia dominated the conversation with, stories about her son's law practice in Boston. Uncle Richard boasted about his new boat. My cousin Amber made sure everyone knew about her recent promotion at her husband's family business. When someone finally remembered to ask about my life, my father answered before I could open my mouth. "Morgan's still doing that real estate thing," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "Traveling around looking at empty buildings. Not exactly saving lives, but it pays the bills, right, honey?" I took a careful sip of water. "Actually, Dad, I'm leading the Northeast Division now. We assessed over $600 million in commercial properties last quarter." The table fell silent for a moment. My mother recovered first. "That's nice, dear." "Amber, tell everyone about your new vacation home in the Hamptons." And just like that, my accomplishment evaporated into the ether of family indifference. After dinner, I helped clear the dishes, or tried to. My mother shooed me away. "You don't know where anything goes anymore?" she said, as if I'd forgotten the layout of the kitchen I'd grown up in. "Amber, come help me instead. You always were so organized." I retreated to the living room where my father and uncles were watching a baseball game. No one moved to make space on the couch, so I perched awkwardly on an ottoman in the corner, scrolling through work emails until it seemed acceptable to excuse myself. The garage was as uncomfortable as I'd anticipated. A metal cot with a thin foam mattress had been set up between my father's workbench and a stack of winter tires. A single naked bulb hung from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows across the concrete floor. The air smelled of motor oil and lawn, fertilizer. I changed into pajamas and laid down, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter from the house. It wasn't the physical discomfort that bothered me most. I'd stayed in worse places during site evaluations. It was what the garage represented, my place in the family hierarchy. Out of sight, an afterthought, the family disappointment. Sleep evaded me as my mind replayed years of similar moments. The time my parents skipped my college graduation because my cousin's dance recital was the same weekend. On Christmas, they forgot to get me a gift because they'd been busy shopping for everyone else. The countless times my achievements were minimized, while my cousin's mediocre accomplishments were celebrated like Olympic victories. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. Around midnight, I slipped out of the garage needing to use the bathroom. The house was mostly dark, but voices drifted from the kitchen. I paused in the hallway, recognizing my mother's tone, the one she used when gossiping. It's just disappointing, you know? All that potential, and she chose such a strange path. No husband, no children, just wandering from city to city looking at buildings. Patricia's son is arguing cases before the state Supreme Court, and Morgan's what? Measuring square footage? My aunt's voice. Well, not everyone can be successful in the traditional sense. At least she's independent. Too independent, my mother sighed. We always hoped she'd settle down nearby, give us grandchildren. Instead, she's like a stranger who visits occasionally. I barely know what's happening in her life. Have you told her how you feel? My aunt asked. What's the point? Morgan's always been stubborn. Once she sets her mind on something, there's no changing it. Robert and I have just accepted that some children turn out differently than you hope. I felt a familiar ache in my chest. But this time, something else accompanied it. Anger. Clean. Clarifying anger. I'd spent years seeking validation from people who were fundamentally incapable of seeing my value. People who defined success through such a narrow lens that my achievements would never register. I retreated to the garage without using the bathroom, my mind racing. 3 months ago, when I'd seen their address on the Lakeside Heritage Properties portfolio, I'd purchased the house almost on impulse. It had seemed like a solid investment. Historic homes in Connecticut held their value well, and I knew the property intimately. I'd planned to keep my ownership quiet, to be a silent landlord through the management company that had been handling the property for years. But now, lying on that uncomfortable cot, I realized I'd been given a gift, the perfect opportunity to reset the power dynamics that had defined our relationship for too long. In the morning, I rose early, showering in the cramped half-bathroom attached to the garage before anyone else was awake. I dressed with particular care, a tailored navy suit I usually reserved for client presentations, pearl earrings, hair smoothed into a sleek bun. I wanted to look every inch the successful professional my family refused to see. I retrieved the property deed from my car and placed it in my briefcase, then made coffee in the kitchen. One by one, family members shuffled in, gravitating toward the caffeine like moths to flame. My father appeared last, already complaining about the previous night's extra bourbon. "Morning, Dad," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Sleep well?" "Like a log," he replied, not bothering to ask about my night on the cot. When everyone was settled around the breakfast table, plates loaded with my mother's traditional reunion breakfast casserole, I cleared my throat. "I want to thank you all for your hospitality," I began carefully. "It's been illuminating to see where I stand in this family." My mother's eyes narrowed. She recognized my tone, what she called my difficult voice. "Morgan, if this is about the sleeping arrangements, it was just for one night. Don't make a scene." I smiled and opened my briefcase. "Actually, Mom, there's something I've been meaning to tell you and Dad, something I think the whole family might find interesting." I slid the property deed across the table. The deed lay in the center of the breakfast table like a bomb waiting to detonate. My father reached for it first, adjusting his reading glasses as he scanned the document. "What's this supposed to be?" he asked, but his voice had already lost its morning bluster. "It's the deed to this house," I replied evenly. "I purchased it from Lakeside Heritage Properties 3 months ago." My mother snatched the paper from him, her eyes darting across the page. "This is some kind of joke, right? Or a mistake?" "No. Mistake. I'm your landlord." The silence that followed was absolute. Even my cousin's children, usually noisy and restless, seemed to sense the seismic shift occurring at the table. "That's not possible," my father finally said, his face flushing. "We have a lease with Lakeside Heritage." "Had," I corrected. "The management company now works for me. I've been reviewing your payment history, maintenance requests, everything." Did you know you've been late with rent 4 times in the past year? Aunt Patricia gasped dramatically. Uncle Richard suddenly became intensely interested in his coffee mug. My cousin Amber looked at me with new eyes, calculating what this revelation meant for the family power structure. My mother's hands trembled slightly. Why wouldn't you tell us? Why would you go behind our backs like this? The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Like you went behind my back last night telling Aunt Patricia I'm the family disappointment? Or how about making me sleep in the garage while distant relatives I barely know got my childhood bedroom? She paled. You heard that? Morgan, I didn't mean… You meant every word, I interrupted. You've always meant it. I've just finally stopped pretending not to notice. My father attempted to regain control of the situation with forced joviality. Now, this doesn't change anything. We're still family. Morgan's not going to evict her own parents, are you, sweetheart? All eyes turned to me, awaiting reassurance. I took a deliberate sip of my coffee. I'm not making any decisions this morning. What I am doing is setting some new boundaries. I pulled a folder from my briefcase and removed several spreadsheets, evidence I'd compiled over the past week once I learned about the reunion. Let's talk about my relationship with this family. I've tracked every major family event for the past 10 years. Birthdays, graduations, holidays. I was invited to 43% of them. I attended 92% of those I was invited to. Meanwhile, I invited all of you to every significant milestone in my life. The attendance rate? 17%. My mother found her voice. That's absurd. We've always supported you. Have you? When I was made department head last year, who showed up to the celebration dinner I organized? No one. When I broke my ankle during that property assessment in Chicago 2 years ago, who came to help me when I couldn't? Walk? Not family. My assistant Casey flew out and stayed with me for a week. I flipped to another page. Then there's financial support. Since I graduated college, I've loaned various family members money 26 times. I looked pointedly at my father, who'd borrowed $5,000 for a business venture that never materialized, and my cousin Amber, who'd needed help with her destination wedding. Total amount $32,450, amount repaid $4,275. Uncle Richard cleared his throat uncomfortably. He still owed me $3,000 from his daughter's tuition crisis. Are you actually keeping score? My mother asked incredulously. That's not what family does, isn't it? You've certainly kept score of all my perceived failures. My lack of a husband, my non-existent children. My career apparently doesn't measure up to Amber's job at her father-in-law's company or Patricia's son's law practice. Amber had the decency to look embarrassed. My aunt studied her plate intently. I'm not doing this to hurt anyone, I continued, softening my tone slightly. I'm doing it because for years I've accepted a role in this family that diminishes me. The garage last night was just the final confirmation of where I stand. My father attempted a different approach. We've been good tenants, Morgan. Never damaged anything. Always took care of the place like it was our own. It was your own, I reminded him. Until you lost it in that bad investment 15 years ago. The same investment I advised against, by the way. The one you told me I was too inexperienced to understand. He flinched visibly. I'd just graduated with my finance degree back then, and had cautioned him against the scheme. He'd dismissed me, outright, costing my parents their home and most of their savings. So what happens now? My mother asked quietly, no longer bothering with indignation. Are you raising our rent? Evicting us? What's your endgame here? I closed my folder and returned it to my briefcase. I haven't decided yet. But for the first time, I'm in a position where my voice can't be ignored or dismissed. I stood up, surveying the table of relatives who suddenly saw me in an entirely new light. Not as the family disappointment, but as someone with power. I have that meeting in the city, so I need to leave. Thank you for the garage accommodations. They were very educational. As I turned to go, my father called after me. Morgan, wait. We should talk about this privately. I paused at the doorway. We will, but not today. For once, I'm not rearranging my schedule for this family. I'll be in touch next week. Walking to my car under the stunned gazes of various Pattersons, I felt lighter than I had in years. Last night in that garage, something had fundamentally changed. Not just my awareness of how my family saw me, but how I saw myself. The disappointment was theirs to carry now, not mine. The drive to the city gave me time to process what had just happened. My hands still trembled slightly on the steering wheel. Confrontation had never been my strong suit, despite my professional confidence. Part of me already wondered if I'd gone too far, if that momentary satisfaction was worth the family chaos I'd just unleashed. My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts and calls from various family members, which I ignored. I needed to focus on my meeting, a $40 million commercial property that wouldn't evaluate itself. When I arrived at my apartment that evening, emotionally and physically drained, there was a figure waiting by my door. My cousin Emma, Aunt Patricia's youngest daughter. Unlike the rest of the family, Emma had always marched to her own beat. She'd eschewed the family obsession with prestigious careers and instead opened a small bookstore in New Hampshire. We'd never been particularly close, but we'd never been at odds either. "How did you know where I live?" I asked, too tired for pleasantries. Emma shrugged. "Asked your assistant when I called your office. Casey was hesitant until I mentioned I was bringing wine and an apology." She held up a bottle of my favorite Cabernet. I unlocked my door and motioned her in. My apartment was modest but comfortable, an open concept with large windows overlooking the city. Artwork from my travels adorned the walls, and bookshelves lined one entire side of the living room. "Nice place," Emma commented, taking it in. "Very you." I accepted the compliment with a nod and grabbed 2 glasses from the kitchen. "So you're the family ambassador?" Emma laughed, uncorking the wine. "God, no. They have no idea I'm here. In fact, they'd probably be furious if they knew." That piqued my interest. "Then why are you here?" She poured the wine and handed me a glass. "Because what happened at breakfast was long overdue, and I wanted to tell you I think you're right." I nearly choked on my first sip. "You... what?" "Come on, Morgan. The family has treated you like an outsider for years. The garage thing? That was just the most obvious example." She settled onto my couch, tucking her legs beneath her. "When you laid out those statistics at breakfast, the events, the loans, I wasn't surprised. I've watched it happen." I studied her, looking for signs of manipulation or ulterior motives, but found none. "Why didn't you ever say anything before?" Emma's expression turned rueful. "Self-preservation, mostly. It's easier to keep your head down in that family. Plus, I have my own black sheep status to maintain with my quaint little bookshop, as Mom calls it." For the first time that day, I felt myself relax slightly. There was something validating about having a witness, someone who saw what I saw. "They've been in damage control mode since you left," Emma continued. "Aunt Lisa suggested you might be having a nervous breakdown. Uncle Richard thinks you did this as revenge for some perceived slight. Your mom cried a lot." "And my dad?" "Mostly angry, then worried when he remembered you actually do own the house now." I swirled the wine in my glass, watching the legs form and dissolve. "I'm not going to evict them. I know that. They probably know that too, deep down. But the fact that you could? That's a power shift they don't know how to handle." We sat in companionable silence for a moment before Emma asked the question I'd been asking myself all day. "So what are you going to do?" I sighed. "Honestly, I don't know. When I bought the house, it was just a good investment opportunity. I never planned to use it as leverage. But now? Now I think maybe it was something else too. Maybe subconsciously I wanted them to see me differently, to acknowledge my success instead of focusing on what I haven't done. Emma nodded. The daughter who wasn't good enough to sleep in the house just bought the whole damn thing. It's poetic, really. Despite everything, I found myself smiling. It does have a certain symmetry. For what it's worth, Emma said, refilling our glasses, I've always thought you were the most interesting, Patterson. The rest of us followed such predictable paths. You went out and built something completely your own. Her words landed differently than any praise I'd received before. Perhaps because they came without expectation or obligation. My boss called me this afternoon, Emma continued, changing subjects. She was hysterical. Apparently, Aunt Patricia came into the bookstore after leaving your parents' house and told her I'd be quitting soon to help with the family crisis. When Sheila asked me about it, I had no idea what she was talking about. I winced. Sorry about that. Don't be. It's classic Patterson behavior, deciding everyone else's lives without consulting them. She set down her glass. Actually, that's the other reason I came. I have some information you might find interesting. Emma pulled out her phone and navigated to her photos. After everyone started panicking about the house, your dad made some calls that I happened to overhear. She handed me the phone. On the screen was a photograph of a handwritten note in my father's distinctive scrawl. Call Martin Ree Patterson. Motors loan modification? Property assessment for refinancing? Patterson Motors? Dad's dealership closed years ago. Emma's expression turned serious. Did it? Because he was talking about monthly reports and sales figures. And something about using the house as collateral for a business loan. My mind raced. The dealership had supposedly failed during the financial crisis, around the same time they'd lost the house. It was part of the family narrative. My father's business dreams crushed by economic forces beyond his control. Are you saying he's been running the dealership this whole time? In secret? Emma shrugged. I don't know for sure, but he was definitely talking about it like it's an ongoing concern, not a decade-old failure. I felt the ground shift beneath me for the second time that day. If Patterson Motors was still operational, where was that money going? And why had my parents maintained the fiction of financial struggle all these years? There's something else, Emma said quietly. When he was making those calls, I heard him mention a trust. Something about keeping it secure from Morgan. My wine glass froze halfway to my lips. A trust? What trust? I don't know the details, but whatever it is, he seemed very concerned about you finding out about it now that you own the house. The implications were staggering. I'd spent years believing my parents were barely getting by, that their financial mistakes had left them vulnerable. I'd even secretly set up an emergency fund for them that I'd never mentioned. What other secrets were hidden behind the facade of the family that had relegated me to the garage? Morgan, Emma said gently, I think there's a lot more for you to uncover, and I want to help. 2 days after the breakfast revelation, my parents requested a meeting. Their tone had shifted from indignant to conciliatory, suggesting they'd moved from denial to bargaining. I agreed to meet them at a neutral location, a small cafe halfway between my apartment and their house. My house, technically. I arrived early, selecting a corner table that offered both privacy and a clear view of the entrance. When my parents walked in, the change in their demeanor was striking. Gone was my father's usual commanding presence. My mother's perpetual look of disapproval had been replaced with something approaching humility. Morgan, my father began after they'd sat down and ordered coffee. We've had some time to process everything and we want to clear the air. My mother nodded, her hands clasped tightly on the table. What happened at the reunion was unfortunate. We should have given you proper accommodations. This isn't about the garage, I said quietly. Not really. It's about years of being treated as an afterthought in my own family. My father shifted uncomfortably. We may have taken you for granted sometimes. You've always been so self-sufficient, so capable. Not like Amber or Patricia's kids who constantly need rescuing, I supplied. He had the grace to look embarrassed. We're proud of you, Morgan. Maybe we haven't said it enough. You haven't said it at all, I corrected. But I didn't come here for retroactive validation. I came because Emma mentioned something interesting about Patterson Motors. The color drained from my father's face. My mother's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. Emma should mind her own business, my mother said sharply, the brief facade of contrition already cracking. So it's true then? The dealership never closed? My father cleared his throat. It's complicated. We restructured. After the financial difficulties. Downsized considerably. But it's been operational this whole time? Generating income? He nodded reluctantly. It's a small operation now, just enough to supplement our retirement. Supplement the retirement you claimed didn't exist? The one. That had you barely making ends meet when I offered financial help last Christmas? My mother jumped in. We didn't want to burden you with our problems. You have your own life. That's very considerate, I replied, keeping my tone even. And what about the trust Emma overheard you mentioning? The one you were concerned about? Me discovering? The look they exchanged confirmed Emma's information had been accurate. That nosy little, my mother began, but my father placed a restraining hand on her arm. It's your grandmother's trust, he admitted reluctantly. Your mother's mother. She established it before she died. Grandma Florence? She died when I was in high school. You told me she left everything to charity. Most everything, my father hedged. There was a small trust. Family money is meant to be preserved. How small? More uncomfortable glances between them. The original amount was around $300,000, my mother finally said. It's grown since then. I felt as if the air had been sucked from the room. $300,000? And you never told me about this because… It's complicated, my father repeated, his go-to phrase when avoiding difficult truths. There were conditions to the trust. Florence was traditional in her values. A sick feeling grew in my stomach. What kind of conditions? My mother smoothed her napkin obsessively. The funds were designated for family members who upheld certain standards. Marriage, children, continuing the Patterson name. In other words, not me, I said flatly. You chose a different path, my father said, as if that explained everything. Florence wouldn't have approved of your lifestyle. My lifestyle? You mean my career? My independence? The fact that I haven't tied myself to the first man who could… Give you grandchildren? My mother flinched at my tone. You never showed interest in the things Florence valued. We were simply respecting her wishes. While using her money, I noted. Who's benefited from this trust so far? More silence. Amber, I guessed. For her wedding and that vacation home she wouldn't stop talking about at dinner? My father nodded reluctantly. Who else? Your cousins Jason and Tyler, for their graduate degrees and business ventures. The pieces clicked into place. The mysteriously funded educational opportunities, the sudden home purchases, the lavish weddings, all those family milestones that had seemed beyond their apparent means. All funded by a trust I'd never been told existed because I didn't qualify. So let me make sure I understand, I said carefully. For years, you've been distributing my grandmother's money to family members who meet some arbitrary moral standard. From the 1950s, while simultaneously borrowing money from me, money I never saw repaired, because you claim financial hardship. Put so bluntly, even my father seemed to recognize the hypocrisy. We'd like to make things right, he said, reaching into his jacket and retrieving an envelope. We've prepared an offer. I took the envelope but didn't open it. An offer? For the house, my mother explained. We've spoken with the bank. With the dealership as collateral, we can secure financing to buy it back from you. Market value, of course. I set the envelope on the table, unopened. You think this is about money? Isn't it? My father asked, genuinely confused. You revealed your ownership of the house to assert financial dominance. We're acknowledging that power and offering a reasonable solution. His complete misunderstanding of my motives was almost comical. All they saw, even now, was a transactional opportunity to restore the status quo. No, I said, sliding the envelope back across the table. This isn't about money. It's about respect, recognition, being treated like a valued member of this family instead of an inconvenient obligation. We do value you, my mother insisted. Enough to make me sleep in the garage while relatives I barely know got comfortable. Beds? Enough to call me the family disappointment behind my back? Enough to hide a family trust from me because I don't fit some archaic definition of success? They had no answer to that. I stood up, gathering my purse and jacket. I'm not selling the house. Not yet. And I'm not making any decisions about your living situation until I have all the facts, which, clearly, I don't. Morgan, be reasonable, my father started, but I cut him off. I'm being extremely reasonable given the circumstances. Your rent remains the same for now. I won't evict you. But this conversation isn't over. It's just beginning. As I walked away, my mother called after me. What are you planning to do? I turned back briefly. I'm going to do what I do professionally, a thorough assessment of the property and all its hidden features, starting with this trust you've been keeping from me. The week after meeting my parents, I took an unprecedented step. I requested 2 weeks of personal leave from work. In 7 years with the company, I'd never taken more than 3 consecutive days off. My boss was so shocked he asked if I was dying. Not dying, I assured him. Just finally taking care of some long overdue personal business. Emma and I had developed an unlikely alliance. Her bookstore was closed on Mondays and Tuesdays, which became our investigation days. We started with Grandma Florence's trust. The executor would have all the documentation, Emma explained as we sat in my apartment surrounded by laptops and legal pads. Any idea who that might be? In this family? Probably my father, I sighed. Not necessarily. Florence was your mother's mother, and she was— how do I put this delicately? A shrewd old battle-axe who trusted no one, I supplied, remembering my grandmother's formidable presence. Emma laughed. Exactly. She might have chosen someone outside, the immediate family. After calls to several family lawyers, we discovered that the trust was managed by Florence's longtime attorney, Howard Greenberg, now semi-retired but still maintaining select clients. Getting an appointment with him wasn't easy, but my property assessment credentials finally got us through the door. His office was old school, wood-paneled walls, leather-bound law books, the lingering scent of pipe tobacco, though smoking had been banned in the building for years. Ms. Patterson, he greeted me, peering over half-moon glasses. I was surprised to receive your call. Your parents have typically handled all matters relating to Florence's estate. That's precisely why I'm here, Mr. Greenberg. I recently discovered the existence of my grandmother's trust, which was never disclosed to me. He frowned. Never disclosed? That's irregular. The terms of the trust explicitly state that all family members should be informed of its existence upon reaching adulthood. Emma and I exchanged glances. Could we see those terms? I asked. Greenberg hesitated. As you're a named beneficiary, I suppose it's appropriate. He pulled a thick file from his cabinet and handed me several pages of legal documentation. I scanned. The trust agreement, my property assessor's eye trained to spot important details in dense text. What I found stunned me. According to this, I've been eligible to access trust funds since I turned 25. For education, property purchase, or business investment. Greenberg nodded. That's correct. The moral conduct clauses only apply to the marriage and child-rearing portions of the trust. Moral conduct clauses? Florence was traditional, but not in the way your parents apparently indicated, he explained. She valued self-sufficiency, education, and financial independence, particularly for the women in the family. She was concerned that her female descendants might become dependent on husbands or family charity. I nearly laughed at the irony. So the trust wasn't designed to reward traditional life choices at all. Quite the opposite. The marriage stipulations were to ensure family members didn't marry recklessly or for money. The education and career development funds have no such restrictions. And my parents knew this? Greenberg shifted uncomfortably. They've received quarterly statements detailing all trust provisions since Florence's passing. I personally walked them through all terms as co-administrators. Co-administrators, not beneficiaries. The distinction was crucial. They've been controlling who gets access to the information, Emma realized aloud. I can't speak to that, Greenberg said carefully, but I can tell you that as a named beneficiary, you're entitled to your portion regardless of their approval. Approximately $175,000, plus accumulated interest. The figure hit me like a physical blow. All those years of struggling to put myself through graduate school, of taking out student loans I was still repaying, of living in tiny apartments while I built my career, while a substantial sum sat, waiting for precisely those purposes. I'd like to see the distribution history, I said, my voice steady despite my churning emotions. Greenberg provided another document. The distribution pattern told its own damning story. Regular withdrawals for cousins' education, housing for those who married suitably, business investments for the male Pattersons. My name appeared nowhere as a recipient. I'll need copies of everything, I told him. And I'd like to formally claim my portion of the trust. That evening, Emma and I celebrated this revelation with takeout Thai food in my apartment. What will you do with the money? She asked, twirling pad thai around her fork. I considered the question. A week ago, I might have said pay off my student loans, or perhaps buy a larger apartment. But something fundamental had shifted in me. I think I'm going to start my own property assessment firm, I said, surprising myself with the clarity of the vision. Focus on historical properties, helping people restore rather than demolish them. Wow, Emma said, genuinely impressed. That's a big step. It's time. I've been building someone else's business long enough. I took a thoughtful sip of wine. What about you? If you could access your portion of the trust, what would you do? Emma looked startled. My portion? I'm not a direct descendant of Florence. No, but the trust provisions include all female descendants of Florence's sisters as well, which includes you. Didn't you read that part? Her fork clattered against her plate. Are you serious? I handed her the relevant page from Greenberg's documentation. Her eyes widened as she read. I could expand the bookstore, she whispered, a world of possibilities suddenly opening before her. Add that coffee shop section I've always wanted. Maybe even start the literary festival I've been dreaming about. You could, I agreed. And I think that's exactly what Florence would have wanted. It was a profound moment. Two women who had always been made to feel peripheral to the family, suddenly realizing we had been central to our grandmother's vision all along. The next day, I took another unprecedented step. I walked into my boss's office and gave notice. I've valued my time here, I told him, but it's time for me to build something of my own. When I left the building that evening, I felt lighter, as if I'd set down a burden I hadn't fully acknowledged. I was carrying. The family disappointment was stepping into her power, not just in relation to her parents, but in her own life. That night, I drafted an email to my parents. It was time for another conversation, but this one would be entirely on my terms. My email to my parents was simple: a request for a family meeting at the house, my house, the following Sunday. I specified that I wanted all family members present, not just my parents. If they wanted to resolve this situation, it would need to be done transparently, with everyone involved. Their response came quickly, too quickly, agreeing to my terms. Without question. The sudden compliance after years of dismissal was unsettling rather than satisfying. Emma agreed to accompany me, both for moral support and because she had her own stake in what would be discussed. "They're planning something," she warned as we drove to the house that Sunday afternoon. "That immediate capitulation isn't like Uncle Robert at all." "I know," I replied, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "But whatever they're planning, we have something they don't. The truth," Emma said, "and documentation to prove it." When we arrived, the driveway was already filled with cars, more than I'd expected. Not just my parents, but Aunt Patricia and Uncle Richard, cousins Amber and Jason, even my father's brother David and his wife Susan, who rarely participated in family gatherings. The full Patterson War Council had been assembled. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, with family members arranged around the living room in a configuration that felt oddly formal. My mother had gone all out: finger sandwiches on the good china, coffee service with the silver pot usually reserved for holidays, an elaborate performance of normalcy. "Morgan, Emma," my father greeted us, as if this were any ordinary family gathering. "Thank you for coming. We thought it best to include everyone in this discussion since it affects the family as a whole." I noted his phrasing, "we thought," as if my explicit request for the entire family to be present had been his idea. "That was my request," I reminded him quietly, setting my briefcase on the coffee table. "And I'm glad everyone could make it." My mother appeared from the kitchen, her smile fixed firmly in place. "Coffee, dear? Emma?" "No, thank you," I said. "I'd prefer to get straight to the point." Aunt Patricia shifted uncomfortably on the sofa. "Robert, perhaps you should explain the situation to everyone before Morgan begins." My father cleared his throat importantly. "Yes. Well, for those who don't know, Morgan has recently purchased this house from Lakeside Heritage Properties. While we were surprised by this unconventional move, we've come to see it as an opportunity for positive change in our family dynamics." The revisionist history was breathtaking. I caught Emma's eye. She gave a subtle head shake, warning me not to react emotionally. "What your father means," my mother interjected smoothly, "is that this situation has helped us realize we haven't always been as appreciative of Morgan as we should have been. We've prepared something to make amends." She nodded to my father, who produced an envelope similar to the one they'd offered at the cafe. "We'd like to formally recognize Morgan's achievements and contributions to this family." The setup became clear. They were attempting to control the narrative, to reframe my house purchase as a cry for attention rather than the consequence of their actions. They wanted witnesses to their magnanimous response to their daughter's emotional outburst. "Before we get to that," I said calmly, opening my briefcase, "I'd like to address something else, something that affects many people in this room." I removed the trust documentation Greenberg had provided. I recently discovered that Grandma Florence established a substantial family trust before her death, a trust that many of you have benefited from, while others have been deliberately kept in the dark about its existence. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Aunt Patricia's face paled. Uncle Richard became intensely interested in his coffee cup. "Morgan," my father said warningly, "family financial matters are hardly appropriate for a group discussion." "I disagree," I replied, "especially when those matters have been selectively shared to benefit some family members while excluding others." Turned to face the room. "How many of you knew about Florence's trust?" Hands raised tentatively. Amber, Jason, Uncle Richard, the beneficiaries. "And how many of you were told you weren't eligible due to moral conditions or traditional values?" Emma raised her hand. "To my surprise, so did my cousin Tyler and my Aunt Susan." "That's what I thought," I said. "I've spoken with Howard Greenberg, the trust's executor. The actual terms of the trust are very different from what some of you have." been led to believe. I outlined the true conditions of the trust, watching comprehension dawn on various faces around the room. Tyler looked particularly stunned. He'd abandoned his dream of culinary school when told the trust would only pay for sensible education, ultimately following his father into insurance. "You deliberately misrepresented the terms," I said, looking directly at my parents. "You used Florence's money to reward family members who followed your preferred life paths while withholding it from those who didn't conform." "Now, Morgan," my father began, his voice taking on the patronizing tone I knew so well. "You're oversimplifying a complex legal arrangement. We were simply interpreting Florence's wishes as we understood them." "Were you?" I pulled out another document. "This is the letter Florence left with Greenberg to be shared with all beneficiaries. A letter none of us received." I read aloud. "To my daughters, granddaughters, and all female descendants, I establish this trust to ensure you never find yourselves dependent on the whims of husbands or fathers. Education, property, business. These are the tools of independence. Use them wisely." The silence that followed was profound. My mother's carefully composed expression had crumbled. "There's more," I continued. "As co-administrators, my parents have received substantial administrative fees from the trust. Over $180,000 in the past 15 years. A murmur ran through the room. Administrative fees for distributing family money while claiming financial hardship. While borrowing money from me, they never repaid. "This isn't just about the garage," I said, addressing the entire family. "Or even about the house. It's about years of manipulation and selective privilege disguised as family values." Uncle Richard stood abruptly. "I think we should continue this discussion another time, when emotions aren't so high." "Sit down, Richard," Aunt Susan said sharply, surprising everyone. "I want to hear the rest, especially the part about why our son was denied funds for his education while Amber received money for a vacation home." The carefully orchestrated family meeting was unraveling. Alliances were shifting visibly as those who had been excluded processed the truth. My father made one last attempt to regain control. "We should discuss this privately, as an immediate family. The rest of you are welcome to speak with us individually later." "No," I said firmly. "No more private discussions. No more selective information. Everyone in this family deserves to know the truth and to make their own decisions based on that truth." I handed copies of the trust documentation to everyone present. "These are your birthright. What you do with this information is up to you." My mother, seeing her carefully constructed social order collapsing, tried a different approach. "Morgan, please, think about what you're doing to the family." I looked at her steadily. "I'm not doing anything to the family. I'm simply bringing the truth to light. What happens next depends on all of us." The aftermath of the family meeting reshaped the Patterson landscape in ways I never could have predicted. Where there had once been a clear hierarchy with my parents at the top, there was now a fragmented network of individual relationships forming and dissolving, based on genuine connection rather than obligation. Uncle Richard and Aunt Patricia left immediately after the meeting, refusing to discuss the trust revelations further. My cousin Amber, who had benefited significantly from the manipulated system, stopped speaking to me entirely. But others responded differently. Tyler, who had abandoned his culinary dreams, contacted Greenberg the very next day to discuss accessing his portion of the trust. 3 weeks later, he enrolled in cooking school. Aunt Susan, who had quietly endured years at the periphery of family gatherings, became one of my most vocal supporters, speaking openly about the preferential treatment she'd witnessed over the years. As for my parents, they retreated into a dignified silence, neither acknowledging their actions nor attempting to justify them further. They continued to live in the house, my house, maintaining a scrupulous punctuality with rent payments that arrived exactly on the 1st of each month, not a day earlier or later. The immediate crisis had passed, but the deeper questions remained unresolved. What would I do with the house long term? What kind of relationship, if any, could I salvage with my parents? And most importantly, what did I want my life to look like now that I was free from seeking their approval? 6 weeks after the family meeting, I sat in a sun-drenched office in downtown Hartford, signing the papers that officially established Patterson Historical Assessment, LLC. With my portion of Florence's trust combined with my savings, I had sufficient capital to launch my own firm specializing in evaluating historical properties for restoration rather than development. Emma sat across from me, serving as witness to the signatures. She had accessed her own portion of the trust and was in the process of expanding her bookstore to include a cafe and community event space. "Congratulations, Ms. CEO," she said as I signed the final document. "Grandma Florence would be proud." "I think she would," I agreed, surprised by how much that thought meant to me, though I doubt she foresaw quite this much drama. "Are you kidding? That woman thrived on shaking things up. Remember when she wore pants to church in 1985 and nearly gave the pastor a heart attack?" I laughed, recalling my grandmother's rebellious streak that I'd somehow inherited despite barely knowing her. Fair point. As we left the lawyer's office, Emma hesitated before asking, "Have you decided about the house?" It was the question everyone had been dancing around. What would the family disappointment do with her unexpected power? "Actually, yes," I said. "I'm meeting with my parents tomorrow to discuss it." The house looked exactly as it always had when I arrived the next afternoon, the same well-tended garden, the same wraparound porch where I'd overheard my mother's devastating comment. But it felt different now. I no longer approached it with the anxiety of someone seeking approval, but with the confidence of someone who knew her worth. My parents received me in the living room, an uncomfortable formality to the interaction that underscored how much had changed. My mother had prepared tea, her standard response to any situation requiring delicate conversation. "You're looking well," she offered tentatively, pouring the tea into cups I remembered from childhood. "We heard you've started your own business." "News travels fast," I observed, accepting the cup. "Yes, Patterson Historical Assessment launched officially last week." "Patterson," my father noted, a flicker of something, pride, surprise, crossing his face. "You kept the family name." "It's my name too," I reminded him gently. "And it was Grandma Florence's before that." He nodded, acknowledging the connection. "What can we do for you today, Morgan?" Direct and to the point. No more pretense that this was a casual family visit. It was a business meeting between the landlord and tenants. "I've made a decision about the house," I said, placing my teacup on the coffee table. "I'm not selling it, and I'm not evicting you." Relief washed across their faces, quickly masked by cautious neutrality. "However," I continued, "I am repurposing it." "Repurposing?" My mother's voice held a note of alarm. "What does that mean exactly?" I retrieved a folder from my bag and handed it to them. "These are plans to convert the garage into a fully equipped apartment. I'll be moving into it next month." My father stared at me in disbelief. "You're moving into the garage? I don't understand." "The garage apartment," I corrected him. "Completely. Renovated with proper insulation, plumbing, heating, everything it should have had before you put your daughter there to sleep on a cot." My mother flinched at the reminder. "But why would you want to live there? In your position, you could afford luxury apartment downtown?" "Yes, I could, but this makes more business sense. I'll be closer to the historical districts I'm focusing on, and I'll be able to oversee the property directly." What I didn't say was that living on the property would also force us all to reckon with our new reality, not through confrontation, but through proximity. No more pretending the fracture hadn't happened, no more avoiding difficult conversations by simply not having them. "You'll be here, all the time," my father said slowly, processing the implications. Not in your space, I assured them. The apartment will have its own entrance, its own utilities. You won't even know I'm there unless I want you to. Unless I want you to? The subtle shift in power dynamics wasn't lost on any of us. My mother set down the plans, her hands trembling slightly. And our lease? Will that change? No. Same terms, same rent. I paused before adding, though I would like monthly family dinners to be part of our new arrangement. Not legally binding, of course, but a good faith effort at rebuilding whatever relationship is possible between us. Family dinners, my father repeated, as if testing the concept. Yes. With one condition, I'm never the one who sleeps in the garage again. That chapter of our story is closed. A heavy silence filled the room as they absorbed the symbolism of my plan. I wasn't seeking revenge. I wasn't trying to humiliate them or extract some twisted form of justice. I was simply rewriting the narrative on my own terms. Construction starts next week, I said, standing to leave. I've arranged for the work to be done during business hours to minimize disruption. My mother rose as well, hesitating in every movement. Morgan, She stopped, seemingly unable to find adequate words. There's time, I said quietly. We don't have to resolve everything today, or even this year, but we do have to start somewhere. As I walked back to my car, I felt a curious lightness in my step. The family disappointment had found her voice, her power, and perhaps most importantly, her boundaries. The garage that had once represented my exclusion would soon become a symbol of my independence. Sometimes the most profound transformations begin in the unlikeliest of places, even in a detached structure with a concrete floor and the lingering scent of motor oil. 1 year after the fateful family reunion where I'd been relegated to the garage, I stood in my completed apartment, admiring how the space had been transformed. The concrete floor was now covered with warm hardwood. The single naked bulb had been replaced with recessed lighting and elegant fixtures. The workbench and winter tires were long gone, replaced by custom bookshelves and comfortable furniture. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same square footage that had been deemed barely adequate for a cot was now a stylish one-bedroom apartment featured in a local architecture magazine for its innovative conversion of existing structures. My business had flourished beyond my most optimistic projections. Patterson Historical Assessment had quickly built a reputation for thorough, preservation-minded evaluations. We'd expanded to a team of 5, with Emma handling our marketing and community outreach alongside her bookstore responsibilities. Today was significant for another reason. The Patterson family reunion had come around again. This time, however, the dynamics were entirely different. For starters, I was hosting it. The idea had come during one of our monthly family dinners, which had evolved from awkward, stilted affairs into something resembling actual conversations. My father had mentioned that no one had volunteered to host this year's reunion. The traditional location is occupied, he'd said, with a self-deprecating smile that would have been unimaginable a year ago. I could host it, I'd offered, surprising even myself. Between the main house and my apartment, we have plenty of space. The silence that followed was thoughtful rather than tense. Are you sure? My mother had asked. After last year, especially after last year, I'd replied. It's time to create some new memories. So here we were. I checked my watch and headed through the private garden path that connected my apartment to the main house. The caterers were already setting up on the back lawn, arranging tables under string lights that crisscrossed the yard. Emma was directing the placement of flowers, sunflowers, my grandmother's favorite. Nervous? She asked as I approached. A little, I admitted. It's a bold statement, hosting the reunion after everything that happened. It's the perfect statement, she corrected. The family disappointment is now the family cornerstone. The term no longer stung. I'd reclaimed it, transformed it, just as I'd transformed the garage. My parents emerged from the house, my father carrying a box of old family photographs I'd asked him to find. "These go back 5 generations," he said, setting them on a display table we'd prepared, including quite a few of Florence in her younger days. He'd been different since the trust revelation, quieter, more reflective. The bluster and authority had given way to something more authentic. Last month, he'd finally apologized for keeping the trust from me. Not a grand, dramatic gesture, but a simple acknowledgement over coffee. "We were wrong, Morgan. About the trust, about you. I'm sorry. It wasn't everything, but it was something. A beginning." My mother had changed too, in her way. She still struggled with direct emotional expression, but she'd found other ways to communicate. She'd been the one to suggest hanging my business awards alongside the family photos that lined the main hallway, a small gesture that spoke volumes. "The first guests will be arriving soon," she said now, straightening a tablecloth unnecessarily. "Are you sure you don't want to use the main house instead of your apartment? There's more room for you to get ready." "I'm fine where I am," I assured her. "My space works for me." The emphasis wasn't lost on her. She nodded, accepting replacing what would once have been an argument. Guests began arriving at 4. The composition of the reunion had shifted significantly. Some family members had drifted away after the trust revelations. Amber and her husband sent polite regrets, as did Uncle Richard. But others who had rarely attended in the past were now present. Tyler arrived with his boyfriend, something he'd never felt comfortable doing at previous family gatherings. Aunt Susan came early to help, bringing along her sister from her mother's side who had never been included before. New faces mingled with familiar ones. My business partner Daniel chatted with my father about historical architecture. Emma's bookstore staff had been invited, expanding our definition of family beyond blood relations. As twilight descended and the string lights illuminated the yard, I found myself standing on the porch steps, watching these interconnected circles of people, some related by DNA, others by choice and circumstance. My mother appeared beside me, 2 glasses of wine in hand. She offered one to me with a tentative smile. "It's quite different from last year," she observed, surveying the scene. "In every possible way," I agreed. We stood in companionable silence for a moment before she spoke again. "I keep thinking about your grandmother," she said unexpectedly, "about what she intended with that trust." "Independence," I supplied. "The freedom to make choices based on what we want, not what others expect." "Yes." She took a sip of her wine. "I think I misunderstood her for a very long time. Maybe deliberately. It was the closest she'd come to acknowledging her role in manipulating the trust terms." "She would have approved of your business," my mother continued. "And this." She gestured toward the gathering. "Taking charge? Doing things your way? Even living in the garage?" I asked, a hint of challenge in my voice. She met my gaze directly, something she'd often avoided in the past. "Especially that. Reclaiming the space, transforming it into something beautiful and functional. That's exactly what she did with her own life after my father died." Before I could respond, my father called for everyone's attention. As the host, it would traditionally be my role to welcome everyone, but he'd asked if he could say a few words first. "I want to thank my daughter Morgan for hosting us this year," he began, his voice carrying across the yard. "Some of you know that our family has gone through significant changes since we last gathered. Old structures have been questioned, new foundations built." He glanced at me, something like pride in his expression. "Morgan has taught us all something important about integrity, about standing up for yourself even when it's difficult. The Patterson name means something different now because of her." He raised his glass. "To Morgan, no longer the family disappointment, but the family's strength." The toast caught me completely off guard. Tears pricked at my eyes as glasses were raised across the gathering. Emma appeared at my side, squeezing my hand in silent support. Later, as the evening wound down and guests began to depart, I returned to my apartment, my home, the space that had once symbolized my exclusion but now represented my independence. On my desk sat a small wrapped package that hadn't been there earlier. Inside was an ornate antique key with a note in my mother's handwriting. This was Florence's. She would want you to have it. It opened her first property, a small storefront she purchased when everyone told her women shouldn't own businesses. Some legacies skip generations before finding their rightful heir. I placed the key on my mantle, a tangible reminder of how far I'd come. From sleeping on a cot surrounded by winter tires to hosting the family reunion as an equal, more than equal, a leader. Sometimes the deepest wounds carve spaces for our greatest strengths to grow, and sometimes, just sometimes, the family disappointment becomes the family's proudest achievement. 3 years after the garage incident that changed everything, the ripple effects of that watershed moment continued to spread through my life, in unexpected ways. Patterson Historical Assessment had grown into the premier historical property valuation firm in New England. We'd expanded to 15 employees and opened a second office in Boston. The business that had begun as an act of independence had become a genuine legacy. My garage apartment had been featured in Architectural Digest's Small Spaces issue, bringing national attention to our little corner of Connecticut. The article had focused on the symbolism of transformation, from utilitarian storage to elegant living space, without knowing the personal history that made that transformation so meaningful. Emma's bookstore had evolved into a cultural center for the community, with regular author events and a thriving cafe. The literary festival she'd dreamed of was now in its second year, drawing attendees from across the Northeast. We'd become business allies as well as family, often referring clients to each other and collaborating on community preservation projects. But the most significant changes had occurred in less visible ways. On a crisp autumn morning, I stood in the living room of the main house, still my property, still my parents' home, helping my mother sort through decades of accumulated possessions. They had decided to downsize, to move into a smaller place that better suited their retirement needs. "What about this?" she asked, holding up a silver serving tray that had been a wedding gift. "That's yours," I said. "It should go with you." "And this?" "A porcelain figurine I'd given her for Mother's Day when I was 12. "Also yours." She set the figurine down carefully. "You know, we don't have to move. The house is big enough for 2 people." "It's not about the size," I reminded her gently. "It's about starting fresh." The decision had been theirs, surprisingly. After 2 years of our new living arrangement, me in the garage apartment, then in the main house, they'd approached me with the idea of selling the property entirely. "It holds too many memories," my father had explained. "Some good, many complicated. We'd like to find a place without all that history weighing on us." I understood immediately. The house represented not just their financial failure years ago, but the subsequent deceptions, the manipulated trust, the family friction. Even with our improved relationship, those ghosts lingered in the hallways. My mother placed another item in the take box, then paused. "Morgan, there's something we haven't discussed yet." Her tone made me glance up sharply. "What is it?" "Your father and I have been talking with Howard Greenberg about the trust, about our role as co-administrators." I set down the book I'd been examining. "And we're stepping down. We've asked Howard to recommend a neutral third party to oversee distributions going forward." The admission stunned me. Their control over the trust had been their last real source of power in the family structure. "That's significant," I said carefully. "What prompted this?" She straightened a stack of magazines with unnecessary precision. "Tyler's boyfriend, Michael, approached us about accessing the trust for their bakery venture. The old me would have found some reason to deny them, citing Florence's values or some such nonsense. Her self-awareness was startling, But the truth is, she continued, they're exactly the kind of enterprising spirit Florence would have supported. And I realized I no longer trust my own judgment about these matters. Too many years of reshaping the truth to fit what I wanted to believe. It was the most honest assessment she'd ever offered of her own behavior. Who will take over? I asked. That's partly why I wanted to talk to you. Howard suggested you might be the logical choice. I nearly laughed at the irony, the family disappointment becoming the guardian of the family legacy. I don't think that would be appropriate, I said after considering it. I've benefited from the trust in myself. It should be someone truly neutral. She nodded, seemingly relieved. That's what your father said you'd say. Always the ethical one. The compliment felt genuine, without the backhanded quality her praise had often carried in the past. As we continued sorting through decades of family possessions, I found myself reflecting on how thoroughly roles had reversed. My parents now sought my approval rather than the other way around. They consulted me on financial decisions and asked my opinion about family matters. The power dynamic had shifted so completely it was sometimes disorienting. That evening, I met with Tyler and Michael at their newly opened bakery, a charming storefront that specialized in heritage recipes from both their families. The space hummed with conversation and the rich scent of baked goods. Their dream, funded in part by Florence's trust, had become a reality. We're thinking of expanding already, Tyler told me excitedly. The space next door is opening up, and we could add a teaching kitchen for classes. Grandma Florence would approve, I said, sampling a cinnamon roll that Michael insisted I try. Creating opportunities for others was important to her. That's what I've heard, Michael said, though I never had the chance to meet her. You're meeting her legacy every day, I assured him. In Tyler, in Emma, in me, in the trust that helped make this place possible. On my drive home, I took a detour past the old Patterson Motors dealership, my father's business that had supposedly failed years ago but had secretly continued operating. The lot was empty now, the building under renovation. A new sign hung above the entrance. Patterson Community Center, opening spring 2023. Another surprise from my parents. They donated the property after closing the business for real, turning the source of so much family deception into a resource for the town. A small plaque by the entrance acknowledged the donation in honor of Florence Patterson, who believed in building independence through community support. Back at my apartment, I found an invitation in my mailbox. Thick cream paper, elegant typography. A celebration for the 75th anniversary of Grandma Florence's first property purchase. The small storefront whose key now held pride of place on my mantle. The event was being organized by the female descendants of Florence, a gathering to honor her legacy and celebrate the businesses and properties now owned by the women she had sought to empower, even from beyond the grave. I placed the invitation on my desk next to a framed photo from the family reunion. In it, I stood on the porch steps, surrounded by relatives and friends, the string lights casting a warm glow over all of us. My mother stood to my right, my father to my left, Emma beside us. All of us smiling, tentative smiles that acknowledged our complicated history but suggested a willingness to move forward. The family disappointment had not only found her place, but had helped create new places for others. The garage had become a home. The exclusion had become a connection. The wound had become wisdom. Some transformations happen in an instant, like the moment I slid a property deed across a breakfast table. Others unfold slowly through countless small choices and conversations over years. Both kinds matter. Both kinds heal. 5 years after the garage incident, I found myself standing in Howard Greenberg's office once again. The semi-retired attorney had called me for what he described as a matter of significant importance regarding your grandmother's estate. I thought everything with the trust had been settled, I said, taking the seat he offered. The office hadn't changed. Still the same wood paneling, leather-bound books, and lingering scent of pipe tobacco. Howard smiled, the creases around his eyes deepening. The trust continues, of course, but this is about something else entirely. Something Florence left with explicit instructions not to reveal until 5 years after the trust became fully transparent to all beneficiaries. He retrieved a sealed envelope from his desk safe. The paper had yellowed slightly with age, but my grandmother's distinctive handwriting remained clear on the front. To be opened 5 years after the truth is known. The truth about trust? I asked. Howard nodded. Florence was remarkable in her foresight. She anticipated that her intentions might be reinterpreted by those administering the trust. She left this as what she called Phase 2. He handed me the envelope. She specified that you should open it, regardless of who was present when the time came. Me? But she barely knew me. I was just a teenager when she died. Nevertheless, you were named specifically. He gestured to the envelope. Would you like to open it now? With slightly trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded several pages of handwritten notes. The first page contained a brief letter. My dear Morgan, if you are reading this, then the truth about my intentions for the family trust has finally come to light. I suspect it wasn't an easy revelation, knowing my daughter's tendency to control and categorize everything and everyone according to her own values rather than theirs. You were just 15 when I wrote this, but already I recognized in you something the others lacked. Genuine compassion coupled with quiet determination. While others in the family seek validation through external achievements or social standing, you seem to understand that true worth comes from within. What follows is information about properties I acquired throughout my life that were not included in the trust. Properties I kept separate for a specific purpose, to create opportunities for those who might otherwise be overlooked, as I often was. These properties now belong to you, with the hope that you will use them to continue building bridges rather than walls. With affection and confidence, Florence Patterson. The subsequent pages contained details of 7 commercial properties scattered across New England, small but strategic locations that had been held in a separate corporation named Second Chances, LLC. The final page was a formal document, transferring ownership of the LLC to me, requiring only my signature to activate. I looked up at Howard, stunned. I don't understand. Why me? Why keep these properties separate from the trust? Howard removed his glasses, polishing them thoughtfully. Florence once told me that family money too often becomes a weapon rather than a tool. The trust was designed to provide opportunity, but she worried it might also become a source of division and manipulation. Which it did, I noted. Indeed. These properties were her contingency plan, resources that couldn't be controlled by those who might misuse such control. She called it her Independence Fund. I examined the property list more carefully. A small office building in Hartford, a storefront in Portsmouth, a converted warehouse in Burlington. Modest individually, but collectively worth several $millions. She specified that if the trust was managed as intended, these properties would go to a foundation supporting women entrepreneurs, Howard continued. But if the trust was mismanaged or its purpose distorted, they would go to the family member who most embodied her values. She updated her instructions annually until her death. You were her final choice. The responsibility felt enormous. What am I supposed to do with them? Whatever you believe is right. They're yours now, free and clear. He handed me a pen. Sign if you're ready to accept. That evening, I sat in my apartment, no longer in the converted garage as I'd sold, the family house to my parents at a generous discount when they decided they wanted to stay after all. I'd purchased a historic carriage house downtown that served as both home and headquarters for my expanding business. Emma arrived with takeout and wine, responding to my cryptic text about big news. So what's the emergency? She asked, unpacking. Containers of Thai food on my kitchen counter. I handed her Florence's letter. She read it slowly, her eyes widening. "Holy shit," she whispered, looking up. "You're like, seriously wealthy now." "It's not about the money," I said, though the truth was more complicated. "It's about the responsibility. She trusted me with her legacy." "Because you proved yourself trustworthy," Emma pointed out. "When everyone else in the family was playing games and picking sides, you were fighting for the truth." I poured us both wine, trying to process this unexpected turn of events. The irony is that none of this would have happened if they hadn't put me in the garage that night. If they'd treated me with basic respect, I might never have purchased the house, never discovered the truth about the trust. "Sometimes our worst moments lead to our best opportunities," Emma observed. "So what will you do with second chances? LLC?" The question had been circling my mind all afternoon. "I've been thinking about that. What if we created an incubator for women-owned businesses? Subsidized retail and office space, mentorship programs, startup funding, all the things Florence would have wanted for the women in her family, but expanded to the community." Emma's eyes lit up. "Using the properties themselves as launching pads. I love it. And I want to start with the Patterson Community Center," I continued, warming to the idea. "Partner with them to create a business skills program, especially for women re-entering the workforce or starting over after setbacks." My father's donation of the old dealership property had been his way of making amends, not just to me, but to the community he'd often shortchanged in his pursuit of status. Working together on this project might be a way to continue healing our relationship. "The family disappointment becomes the family philanthropist," Emma said, raising her glass in a toast. "Florence would be so proud." I met her toast, feeling a strange mix of emotions: gratitude, responsibility, and a touch of vindication. The next morning, I made an unexpected visit to my parents' house, my old house, arriving just as they were having breakfast on the porch. Morgan, my mother, looked surprised but pleased. "We weren't expecting you today." "I have something to share with you," I said, taking a seat across from them. I told them about Florence's letter, about second chances, LLC, about my plans for the properties. Their reactions were complex: shock, dismay, and eventually, a resigned acceptance. "She always was forward-thinking," my father said finally, "seeing possibilities where others didn't." "Like her granddaughter," my mother added quietly, surprising me. "She saw something in you that we missed for too long." The acknowledgement, simple as it was, meant more than any grand apology could have. "I'd like your input on the business incubator idea," I said, extending an olive branch of my own, "especially regarding the community center partnership." My father's expression brightened. "I'd be honored to help. I have some contacts who might be interested in supporting such an initiative." As I left their house that day, I realized how far we'd all come from that night in the garage. The path hadn't been straightforward, and the healing wasn't perfect, but it was real. Florence had called her company Second Chances for a reason. Sometimes that's exactly what family needs. Not to forget the past, but to build something new from its lessons. 10 years had passed since that pivotal night in the garage. A decade of transformation, rebuilding, and growth, both personal and professional. Patterson's Second Chances had evolved from a concept to a thriving reality. The business incubator program now operated in all 7 of Florence's properties, having launched over 80 women-owned businesses across New England. We'd expanded to include microloans, mentorship programs, and housing assistance for entrepreneurs facing challenging circumstances. What had begun as a response to my own experience had become a mission that extended far beyond family dynamics. Each woman who walked through our doors with a dream and determination reminded me of what Florence had seen in me before I saw it in myself. Today was particularly significant. We were hosting the 10th anniversary celebration of the foundation at the original Patterson house, which had undergone its own remarkable transformation. After my parents finally retired for real, no hidden businesses this time, they'd decided to travel extensively in an RV, exploring national parks and small towns they'd never taken the time to appreciate before. Rather than sell the house back to me as I'd expected, they'd suggested donating it to the foundation. "It should be part of your legacy, not ours," my father had said, the wisdom of his 70 years evident in his eyes. It's where everything changed. So the family home had become the headquarters of Patterson's Second Chances, with the once problematic garage converted into our welcome center and initial interview space, a symbolic entry point for women beginning their entrepreneurial journeys. I stood in what had once been the living room, now an airy meeting space filled with photographs of successful graduates of our program. The familiar bones of the house remained, but the energy was entirely different, purposeful, collaborative, forward-looking. Emma bustled in, clipboard in hand, every bit the efficient executive director she'd become after merging her literary festival with our cultural initiatives. The caterers are set up in the garden, the speakers are doing sound checks, and the documentary crew wants to know if you're ready for your interview, she reported. Also, Tyler and Michael just arrived with enough pastries to feed a small army. "Tell the film crew I need 10 more minutes," I replied, straightening my blazer. "And save me one of Michael's almond croissants before they disappear." The documentary was NPR's idea, a feature on women-led initiatives changing the economic landscape of small communities. They'd been following several of our graduates for months, capturing their journeys from initial concept to market success. My phone buzzed with a text from Casey, my former assistant who now ran our Boston office. "Governor confirmed, arriving at 2 p.m. with the press secretary." The event had grown beyond a simple anniversary celebration. Today, the governor would be signing legislation that Patterson's Second Chances had helped draft, a bill expanding access to capital for women and minority business owners throughout the state. As I was responding to Casey, a familiar voice called from the doorway. "Is this where the family disappointment hangs out these days?" I looked up to see my cousin Amber standing hesitantly at the entrance, a gift bag in hand. We hadn't spoken directly in nearly 7 years, not since she'd stormed out of the family meeting where the trust truth had been revealed. "Amber," I said, genuinely surprised. "I didn't know you were coming today." She stepped into the room, looking both different and exactly the same, still expensively dressed and perfectly groomed, but with something softer in her expression. "I wasn't sure I'd be welcome," she admitted, "but Dad suggested, well, insisted, really, that it was time to stop being stubborn, as he put it." Uncle Richard had undergone his own evolution over the years. After initially cutting ties following the trust revelation, he'd gradually reconnected, eventually becoming one of our most vocal supporters among the old guard business community. "Of course you're welcome," I said, gesturing for her to sit. "Family always is," she laughed softly. "Even after everything? I wasn't exactly supportive when you needed it." "Water under the bridge," I assured her, though we both knew it wasn't quite that simple. "How have you been?" Amber set the gift bag on the coffee table. "That's partly why I wanted to see you before the main event. I've made some changes." She explained that after her husband's family business had faced bankruptcy 3 years ago, ironically due to the same type of high-risk investments my father had once made, she'd found herself starting over at 40. The vacation home had been sold. The glamorous lifestyle downsized considerably. "It was humbling," she acknowledged. "Suddenly I was the one needing help, not giving it condescendingly." "That must have been difficult," I said, recognizing genuine vulnerability in my cousin for perhaps the first time. "It was the best thing that ever happened to me," she replied unexpectedly. "I had to figure out who I was without all the trappings, without the status I'd built my identity around." She reached for the gift bag, Which brings me to why I'm here. I've started a business, and I'd like to apply for your program. From the bag, she pulled a portfolio containing a business plan for Second Act Styles, a fashion consulting service for women re-entering the workforce after career gaps or major life transitions. I realized I actually do have skills, just not the ones I thought were important, she explained. I understand how appearance affects confidence, how the right presentation can open doors. I want to help women who feel invisible become impossible, to overlook. I paged through her meticulously prepared materials, impressed despite my lingering wariness. The old Amber would have expected special treatment, preferential consideration because of family connection. This Amber was presenting her idea on its merits, prepared to be judged by the same standards as anyone else. This is actually really good, I said honestly. You've identified a genuine need, and your background gives you credibility in this space. So you'll consider it? She asked. And I heard in her voice the same vulnerability I'd felt that night in the garage, the fear of rejection, of not being seen as valuable. I'll do better than that, I decided. I'll fast-track it to our selection committee. No guarantees, but if it's as solid as it looks, you could be in our fall cohort. Her carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. Thank you. That's more than I expected. That's what Second Chances is all about, I reminded her. The name isn't accidental. Before she could respond, Emma appeared in the doorway, eyebrows raised in surprise at seeing Amber. Sorry to interrupt, but your parents just arrived. They're asking for you. I should go greet them, I said, standing. Amber, please stay for the event. It would mean a lot to have more family presence. She nodded, gathering her portfolio. I'd like that. And Morgan? I'm really proud of what you've built here. We all are, even those of us who took too long to admit it. I found my parents in the garden, looking tanned and relaxed from their recent adventures in Arizona. My mother embraced me warmly, a gesture that had become more natural over the years, but still carried the echoes of our complicated history. The place looks wonderful, she said, surveying the transformation. So different, yet somehow still the same. Like all of us, my father added with a wry smile. He looked around at the gathering crowd, entrepreneurs, mentors, community leaders, family members both supportive and formerly estranged. Quite a turnaround from that family reunion, isn't it? The observation struck me as profoundly understated. From sleeping in the garage as the family disappointment to hosting the governor at a celebration of a foundation that had changed hundreds of lives, it was more than a turnaround. It was a reinvention. I brought something you might want for the historical display, my mother said, opening her purse to retrieve a small leather-bound book. I found it while we were cleaning out the storage unit last month. It was Florence's journal from 1972, the year she purchased her first property after being widowed. The pages contained not just business notes, but her private thoughts on independence, resilience, and creating opportunities for future generations of women in the family. There's an entry about you, my mother said, turning to a page marked with a silk ribbon. From when you were just a toddler. I read the passage, written in my grandmother's elegant script. Watched little Morgan today, while Elizabeth went shopping. Such a determined child. Spent an hour trying to build a tower of blocks that kept falling. Never cried, never gave up. Simply assessed what went wrong and tried a different approach each time. Robert thinks she's too serious for a 3-year-old and wants her to be more carefree like the other grandchildren. He misses the point entirely. That persistence will serve her when life inevitably knocks down whatever she's building. And it will. Life always does. The question is whether you have the courage to build again. My vision blurred with unexpected tears. Florence had seen me, truly seen me, from the very beginning. While my parents had been measuring me against their narrow definition of success, she had recognized the qualities that would ultimately define my life's work. She knew, my mother said softly. Even then, she knew you were different. Not less, as we sometimes made you feel, but more. More resilient, more determined, more visionary. Coming from her, this acknowledgement was profound. We had worked through many things over the years, but her tendency to diminish my choices had remained a subtle undercurrent in our relationship. Until now. I wish I'd known her better, I said, carefully returning the journal to its protective sleeve. In many ways, you've become her, my father observed. The house, the business incubator, the trust. You've taken everything she started and expanded it beyond what even she might have imagined. The ceremonial part of the event began at 2:00 sharp, with Emma making the introductions from a small podium set up on the lawn. The governor spoke eloquently about economic empowerment and community investment. Several program graduates shared their success stories. A local jazz quartet provided musical interludes. Throughout it all, I found myself watching the guests, rather than the speakers, observing how former strangers had become collaborators, how adversaries had found common ground, how an idea born from exclusion had created a space where belonging was the core value. When it was finally my turn to speak, I stepped up to the podium and surveyed the gathering, my chosen family, my biological family, and the extended community that had formed around our shared vision. 10 years ago, I slept on a cot in the garage of this house, while family members I barely knew occupied comfortable beds inside. I began, my voice steady. I was the family disappointment, the one who didn't fit, who hadn't checked the expected boxes, who was literally and figuratively kept outside. A murmur ran through the crowd. Though many knew pieces of my story, I rarely shared its origins, so directly. That night could have been just another painful memory in a lifetime of feeling undervalued. Instead, it became the catalyst for everything we're celebrating today. Not because I set out for revenge, but because it forced me to recognize my own worth when others couldn't or wouldn't see it. I gestured to the house behind me, to the converted garage that now welcomed women at the beginning of their entrepreneurial journeys. Patterson's Second Chances exists because I discovered something essential that night. Sometimes the greatest opportunities emerge from our moments of deepest exclusion. Sometimes being forced to sleep in the garage is the wake-up call that changes everything. I acknowledged each group that had contributed to our success: the business mentors, the community partners, the family members who had supported us from the beginning, and yes, even those who had come around more recently. Most importantly, I continued, we're here because of the women who trusted us with their dreams, who brought their ideas, their determination, and their resilience through our doors, who refused to accept the limitations others placed on them. Every woman who builds her business despite being told she doesn't belong in the room is continuing Florence Patterson's legacy and transforming another garage into a gateway. The applause that followed felt like the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. As I stepped away from the podium, Emma handed me a glass of champagne for the toast. To second chances, she said, raising her glass. And to unexpected journeys, I added. Later, as the celebration continued into the early evening, I slipped away briefly to the quiet corner of the garden where we'd installed a small memorial bench in Florence's honor. I placed her journal on the seat, running my fingers over the worn leather cover. You were right, I said softly to her memory. About persistence. About building again after life knocks things down. About creating independence for the women who came after you. The setting sun cast long shadows across the property that had witnessed so much of my story. From exclusion to empowerment. From resentment to purpose. The garage that had once symbolized my outsider status now stood as a testament to transformation. As I sat there in quiet reflection, I thought about the many ways that single night in the garage had altered the trajectory of my life. If I had been given a proper bedroom, Would I ever have purchased the house? Would I have discovered trust manipulation? Would I have found my true calling in creating opportunities for others who felt excluded? The documentary filmmaker found me there, camera in hand. "Do you mind if I ask you one more question?" she asked, settling on the bench beside me. "Not at all," I replied, setting Florence's journal aside. "After everything you've been through with your family, the garage incident, the trust revelation, the years of rebuilding relationships, do you have any regrets?" I considered her question carefully, watching the golden light of sunset illuminate the converted garage where it all began. "I used to think that if I could go back in time, I'd change that night," I admitted. "I'd speak up, demand better treatment, refuse to accept the garage accommodation. But now? No, I wouldn't change a thing." Her eyebrows raised in surprise. That discomfort, that literal displacement, forced me to confront truths I might have continued to ignore. It was painful, yes, but necessary. Sometimes you need to be pushed to the margins to see the center clearly. "That's not the answer most people would give," she observed. "Most people haven't slept in a garage and then bought the house," I replied with a small smile. "The experience changes your perspective." After the filmmaker left, I remained on the bench a while longer, watching as staff began the meticulous process of cleaning up after the event. Through the windows of the main house, I could see my parents chatting animatedly with Tyler and Michael. Emma was deep in conversation with Amber, their heads bent over what looked like business documents. My phone buzzed with a notification from our foundation's social media manager. The governor had just posted about the legislation signing, tagging Patterson's Second Chances and calling us a model for community-based economic empowerment. The post was already gathering attention from national media outlets. I thought about the women who would walk through our doors tomorrow, some tentative, some bold, all carrying dreams that others might have dismissed. They would enter through the converted garage, symbolic of both exclusion and transformation. They would sit in chairs where family politics once played out, now repurposed for strategy sessions and business planning. And perhaps most importantly, they would be seen, truly seen, for their potential rather than their conformity to others' expectations. Sometimes life's most painful moments become our most powerful catalysts. Sometimes being relegated to the garage leads you exactly where you're meant to be. And sometimes, just sometimes, the family disappointment builds a legacy that changes not just their own life, but countless others. The family reunion that had started it all was now a distant memory, but its echo had created waves that continued to spread outward, touching lives far beyond what anyone could have imagined that night, especially the parents who made their daughter sleep in the garage, never suspecting she would one day be their landlord, and so much more. As darkness fell, I gathered Florence's journal and made my way back to the main house. Tomorrow would bring new applicants, new challenges, new opportunities to transform exclusion into inclusion. The work was far from finished. In many ways, it had only just begun. But tonight, surrounded by the physical manifestation of my journey from outsider to founder, from dispossessed to property owner, from dismissed to influential, I allowed myself to fully appreciate how far we'd all come. The garage lights were the last to be turned off that evening, symbolic in a way I couldn't have predicted a decade ago. They'd once represented my exclusion from the family circle. Now they illuminated the path forward for countless women walking their own journeys from marginalization to empowerment. The family disappointment had not just found her place in the world, she had created places for others, transforming the very concept of belonging along the way. And that perhaps was the greatest second chance of all. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.